it's a notion that captures the idea of always thinking about yourself, always defining yourself, always understanding yourself through the eyes of other people. And that is clearly what this beginning of chapter 2 begins to suggest this whole novel is going to be about. It's going to be about how this narrator was suddenly forced as a child to see that his own understanding of himself was not how other people understood him, and that if he didn't fit into the category white that he thought he fit into, but he also didn't feel like he fit into the category colored, the way other people define that category, and he had to figure out where he belonged, then that question is completely wrapped up, not just in what he thinks about himself, but in how he perceives what other people think of him. And that is why he says at the beginning of chapter 2, this novel is really important for readers too, because it's not just about what he learns about himself. It is about the fact, what he says, I believe it to be a fact that the colored people of this country know and understand the white people better than the white people know and understand them. And pretty clearly there, he's setting up as a goal here to make white people know and understand colored people better. So he's not just going to give them a picture of himself. He's not just going to give them a picture of his own experience. He's going to give a picture of his life, particularly in terms of how it illuminates, helps people understand what it means to be colored, in his phraseology, at the beginning of the 20th century. And so this is a novel. It's a story that is not just going to be about his process of understanding himself. It's going to be about trying to teach us, really, as readers, what it meant to be African American at the turn of the 20th century. Now, one of the things I think that's very interesting about this is that he says from right up front now, he's going to show us the events of his life and he's going to interpret them for us. He's going to show us how other people's perceptions alter his behavior, but also how his expectations of what those perceptions will be alter not just how he behaves, but how he thinks of himself. That is the fundamental central notion of double consciousness. It's not just that it affects how he behaves, it's also that it affects how he understands himself. So what I'm going to ask you to do for the discussion for this first half of the novel is think about, locate in the first 6 chapters that you've read another scene that you think also delivers a lesson. It may be a scene like this one, where he not only shows us the scene, but he actually explains what this scene is supposed to teach, what it teaches him, what it teaches readers, how we're supposed to understand both the developing notion of himself and the notion that he's trying to develop about what American society was like at the turn of the 20th century. Find a scene and then write a post where you explain what the lesson is that that scene teaches and why you think that scene is important for the developing consciousness of this boy growing into a man, and also for the consciousness he's trying to develop in his readers. And I think those two things don't always produce the same idea, right? Sometimes he learns something and he wants his readers to learn the opposite, or he wants his readers to somehow be complicated by that idea. Now, pretty clearly, this is a novel that he is writing with the intention of educating white people who, even when they were, open-minded and sort of liberal, as you'll see his millionaire friend is later in the novel, don't really understand what it was like to be African American at the turn of the century. Another issue to think about as you keep reading this novel is how does it work for audiences who are not in the same time period that the book was written? In other words, how does this book read 100 years later? Because we are now just 3 years short of 100 years since this book was published. In many ways, this book reads as very contemporary, very current. In other ways, I think it might not. And so one of the things you should think about as you keep reading is how does this look like a modern novel? How is it a novel whose stories you can relate to? And how is it a novel that is a kind of a period piece that captures a particular moment in time that is unlike our current moment. Thanks for having the patience to listen to this lecture online, and you can go to the course website to find definitions of some key terms from this lecture, as well as your discussion prompts. Take care, and I will see you on Monday. I will definitely be there. I hope you have a good weekend.